Hello again, this is UML Operator. In this session, we're going to touch on the Layout tab. Next to the Start tab, you're probably going to use the Layout tab the most. The Layout tab provides groups for diagram, style, align, tools, filter, helpers, and auto refresh. We'll step through each one of these in this session. While I will try to keep this video as short as possible, there are some very important tools and capabilities we need to cover, especially for beginners. Let's start with the diagram group right here. And as shown in the previous video, the ribbon has groups separated by borders. So this is a group, and these are subgroups within this group in the ribbon. And as stated in the previous videos, the Explore group is in all of the ribbons. So we're going to be focused on these other groups. So in the first subgroup, we've got the save disk icon, undo, and redo. So as soon as I make some changes, this disk lit up. It was disabled before. I can undo, and it takes it back to where I started. But you'll notice that redo popped back up. Now I don't use these because I use Control Z for undo, Control Y for redo, and Control S for save. But those features are there for you within the Layout tab. Let's go to the Appearance tools next. Here you see we've got Standard mode, Hand-drawn mode, and Whiteboard mode. So right now I'm in Standard mode, shown by the check that's here. I can take this diagram, which I have up right now, and I can put it in a hand-drawn mode. This is often useful when you're brainstorming with stakeholders and you don't want to make the diagram seem or feel formal or complete. There's also whiteboard mode. So right now everything is white. So if you're in colors and you go into, I'm in a different diagram, whiteboard mode, it just makes all of the fills white. The problem with that is I had white text in here. I'm going to turn off whiteboard mode and it got lost. So just remember that when you're moving between whiteboard, hand-drawn, and standard. I typically stay in standard. It remembers the settings you have for each diagram. We're going to go back to e-commerce, go back here. I am going to go to standard mode. Now when I went to standard mode, it turned off hand-drawn mode and whiteboard mode automatically for you. Next, down in theme, we can access theme and appearance options. This goes back to the Start tab conversation. Basically goes directly to your preferences right onto themes, okay? So I want to get to the fun one. Visibility. Hide page borders in all diagrams. Now there's a couple of ways to do this, and what does this mean? Right now I have it checked because I want to hide them. I'm going to uncheck this, and I'm going to come out a little bit here. And you can see this page border. So this element is going over the page border, gives me an idea. I want to stay within my page parameters for visibility reasons. I don't want to create eye charts or models that cover multiple pages wide. So if I've got that turned on, this border, I'm able to understand and see the page borders based on the parameters I have set up. So what I'm going to do is zoom out a little bit back here. Another way to do this is I can double click in the diagram to bring up the diagram properties dialog box or diagram dialog box. And if I go to diagram here, I can hide page borders in all diagrams, or I can just hide the page border in the current diagram if I happen to have it turned on for everything else. But I'm going to select this here in this diagram. Watch what happens. So I'm going to go to Appearance. It checked it back on for me. So you can control it here in the Layout tab under Appearance, or you can hide borders directly from a diagram for just that diagram or all diagrams. So the next one is Show Diagram Property Notes. I'm going to go ahead and select it. I don't need this in my models, so I'm going to turn it back on. So now I created 2 of them. If I click it again, I'll create 3. I'm just going to go ahead and delete them. I don't like those. It just brings them in. There's another way to do it again in the toolbar. If you go down, you can find diagram notes right here, and you can drag and drop it in, right? But I'm going to delete it. I digress. Go back up here. This is the next one, which is set visibility relationships. Please remember where this is. You're going to use this a lot as you start advancing your models. So when I select set visible relationships, the dialog box pops up and allows me to see all of the lines, associations there are between these elements. I have one that I have hidden. I don't want to show it, and that's between service exchange and data supply. Let's go ahead and turn that on so we show it. I'm going to hit OK, and you can see this line is now available here. So I don't want to see the line in this model. This model, I do want to see the association between these two elements. This model, I don't. So I have the ability to control the appearance in the diagram. Remember, we're in the diagram group. Select it again. Select the item or items that I want to hide. Hit OK, and they are now hidden. Okay, as for show status colors, status, dealing with other appearances, reset local element appearance, all of this, I'll talk about this in another video. I don't use these features that much, but when I do, they're very handy, but we'll cover those in another session. All right, next is the select tooling. I'm going to cover this in another video as well. So, you can select all elements, but you can do the same thing by selecting inside the diagram, hitting Control A. So I don't need that. Select element by type. This one's interesting. I only have one type in here, they're class elements, but when we start getting into more advanced modeling with variants of element types and stereotypes, we may come back to this and cover that then. All right. So the next one is copy selected elements. We'll get into copy, paste, insert, copy as new. We'll cover that in another session. Clear current selection. Essentially, if you have things selected, you can come up here and you can clear the selection. All right. You can also do that just by clicking away from the selection and it will clear it. So interesting, but I don't use any of them. Make all elements selectable. This is a savior sometimes because you're able to make some elements in your models not selectable. And if you're dealing with large models in which you've done that for various reasons, you can just go over and clean it up by make all selectable. It just sets them all back up for you. So that might come in handy. Again, I'm going to cover paste. Paste is new, insert, auto size selected elements. I'll cover that in another session. Okay, in diagram group, again, swim lanes, I'm going to cover in a separate session when we're talking about vertical and horizontal swim lanes, managing those swim lanes, dealing with your matrices, your matrix. Click on help. You can read more, but we'll cover that in another session. Same with roadmap. This is extremely powerful. You can add a roadmap to your various models for various reasons, timeline. I use this extensively in enterprise architecture, especially around the open group architecture framework, TOGAF, where you're covering your landscape and your delivery strategy. Very important, requires an entire session for itself. Right, zoom. I don't use this. It allows you to, zoom in, zoom out, clear. Let me go back here. But I don't use this because I use pan and zoom. And I'll talk about pan and zoom in another session, but play around with these and see what you think. Next, we're going to get into style. All right, in style, you can see there's a lot of similarities of the tooling that's available here versus the diagram toolbar. Now, we talked about this in the Start tab, setting up our preferences. We're able to turn this on and off. I left it on for a reason. I don't normally have this on because I use layout. There's additional tooling here you're going to see here in a moment, right? But most of the tooling that you're going to use, left alignment, right alignment, top alignment, bottom, bring back to front. Some other things that we're going to talk about, coloring, all of that's right here. So I select an element, you can see these lit up. They're enabled. And I can come in here and I can change the fill color to, I'm going to choose something green here. all right? And I can do the same thing up here in style. I can go with the default background color, which is set in preferences for a class element. The fill is, in this case, and you'll see things that are disabled, they're grayed. That's because the tooling is not available. If I select one item, there's some tools that lit up. However, these alignment tools didn't. Why? Because there's nothing to align. So if I get anything out of whack, I can come up here and I can hit the up and it will align it with the item that it came from. So if I move this back up like this, both of them, I can set that. I can also set this alignment here, left. There we go. So you can see that the shortcut key is Control Alt Left, left alignment. I'm going to hit Control Z, take everything back to where it was. All right. So if I come up here and I have, you won't have my default. I'm going to show you this in a second. Default style. This is the default style for the class element. A particular element. Could be object element, class element. And I want to stay with my style. So I create a style for an item and I save it. And that way I can select the item, take it right to the style, right? So I go back up here. That's the default. This is my style. Now you can create other styles. You hit this down arrow, you can save as new, save style, refresh list, delete current style. But if you create a style, like for instance, you want to see everything in the context model that's enhanced, right? So I'm going to come up on this element right here. I want to give it a green border, 2 pixels. I want to give it a fill of this color green. And maybe I want to change the font size to 10. To stick out as enhancing. So what I can come up here and do is I can save as new style, right? Now, and a dialog box pops up right here, and I'm just going to call this new style. I could just put new, and there we go. So now I have a new style. So I can go on this item here and I can go, well, I want to use the new style. I can select 2 elements and I want to apply the new style, right? And test, I want to see test only. I want to see enhancing. You give various colors, and I go back to Peter Code's UML coloring back in the late 90s when UML started up, and use coloring within your models to help your readers understand what's going on in a particular perspective, a particular view. All right. Now I can change all of these. I'm going to select all of them by holding down the left mouse button, come up here, take them back to my default, just like that. All right. So that is the first part of style. We're going to get into copying a style and applying a style next. So let's select an element again, and let's apply our new style again. So I could certainly select various items and then apply that style. I might be doing custom styling off to the side that I don't really need to save. What I'm going to do is select this element, hit this little pin drop, ink dropper. I sometimes call it a pencil, that's a pencil. Ink dropper, and I'm going to select this style, right? And I want to apply this style to this element, hit this little paintbrush. There you go, right? So if you're not using style and you're out and you're creating, I don't know, we're going to go with these colors here for some reason. And you want to take that style and apply that. I'm going to select these 2 elements over on the right. I'm going to paint that. So took up the style using the ink dropper icon. Tells you right underneath when I mouse over tooltips. And then I apply the style using this paintbrush. It applies the currently selected style to the selected elements, right? So again, I can select everything. I can hit Control A and I can come up here and apply my default, and we're back to where we were. As I showed earlier, you've got a paint bucket here. You can apply fill colors to items. You've got line draw color. You can change the border color. You can change the border pixel, make it up to 5, I think. There we go. 5 is the highest you can go. So that concludes this style group. I'm going to take this back to my default style. There we go. And we're going to move into alignment. In alignment, if I select one item, I spoke about this a moment ago, you can't align anything. There's nothing to align to. They're grayed out. They're disabled. I can, however, move this element to the back. Watch this. Right now it's in the front. I can move it to the back. I can bring it to the front. So you'll use that quite a bit, I'm sure. Right? But if as I shared earlier, if I'm aligning items and I would just want to make sure they're aligned, I have the ability to left justify here. I also have it here. But I have other tooling that allows me to align vertically. So it align vertically, it align horizontally. Of course, now it's over the top. But when you have more than one item, you see all of the alignment tools light up for you. You don't have that option that I see in the diagram toolbar. One that you use quite a bit is when you're bringing elements in and you want them equally spaced out, you're going to use this a lot, right? You want them equally spaced down, you're going to use this again, right? So Control Z, let me take everything back to where it was. There we go. All right, so big. This one we're going to talk about next is extremely useful, and I'm going to spend some time on it. All right, so let's mouse over it and read the help text. Configure layout grid and snap to options. We're going to hit the down arrow and bring up our options. So I spoke about this in the Start tab, setting preferences. I don't use grid, snap grid, but I do use smart placement so I can get to show smart placement guides. I love this feature when it was added. So I'm going to go ahead and select standard grid, and you can't see it, but if I had show grid on, and it's still pretty light, and I have them 10 pixels apart, set at 10 units, 10 pixels, whatever unit measurement you're using apart. So I don't use this. So I'm going to turn off grid. I'm going to select smart placement. As soon as I did that, it turned off standard grid. So in smart placement, that allows me to, let me play around with this one again. It allows me to move things around and place them easily. It helps with alignment. It gives me some other capabilities within that. But most importantly, it gives me watch when I don't have that turned on, right? So I'm moving things around. Now watch when I turn this on, right? Now I have this guide. So it shows me that I'm horizontally aligned with that. If I do this, it shows me I'm vertically aligned with CRM. And you'll notice it also will tell me I'm horizontally aligned and vertically aligned between load balancer and CRM from this internet element. Watch when I move it up, it shows me that I'm top aligned with cloud data. So, PowerPoint has this cool feature. A lot of drawing tools have this smart guide feature. I use this quite a bit because when I'm modeling, I'm just dumping elements in the screen and then I have to come in and clean them up. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the tools in the next section of this video, tools over here. But things are pretty dirty and then you have to go in and clean them up. Having this tooling up here for alignment speeds things up for you. All right, now we're in the tools group and we're going to start with filters and layers. Watch when I select this, I get a new window, and for me, it's popping up in the right side where I have it laid out in my workspace, where the browser was, and then I can slide it over where I want to keep it up and put the tab in this window in a place I can easily get to it. All right, so here in this window, you have filters and you have layers, right? So we're going to start with filters. So I'm just going to touch on this. I've already pre-configured some items. We'll get into more detailed because this is an advanced subject, but I've already gone through and created some filters. I didn't create any element type filters, but for e-commerce and for model, I created some filters. So you'll notice here across the top, you can create new filter grouping. You can do other things. We'll talk about that later in another session. but you have the ability when you're doing filtering to provide a fade, a grayscale, a hide, or more. So what I'm going to use is fade. And what I'm doing here is I have tag values. So advanced subject, I'll cover this much later in another session. I want to show you though, so I'm going to go to tags. For this element load balancer, I don't have any intelligence in notes. I have 3 tags. For the properties is stakeholders in the tag, and the value is machines. I have another one for AI, and I have another one for analyst. All right. Again, don't worry about it. I'll cover this in other sessions. But when I'm looking at large enterprise models or even small models and I want to filter out, and I'm going by tag values in this case, because when you're adding a new filter, you give it a filter name and it will, I want to use something else. I don't know, something. How's that, huh? And so you get this dialog box where you can apply the filter to an element, a connector, a tag value, and then the tag value. Do you want to filter the note by the notes, properties or values? I chose value. And that's as simple as that. It'll make more sense when we get to that session. So in this particular case, I want to look at all of the elements that deal with artificial intelligence, have some sort of relevance to artificial intelligence. I want to see all the elements that are relevant to customers, agents, and customers, e-commerce site. Only agents, these 3 elements, primary user, machines. So you'll notice that things are fade. I can still see them. If I change this to grayscale, they're grayed out, right? If I change this to hide, it hides them. So when I'm going through and I'm filtering, I'm able to go through my models and slice and dice particular views that I want to do, that I'm filtering out of the SQL database to represent within my models. If I want to see everything that this author worked on, so UML operator worked on these elements, where me, Tim Aykroyd, worked on these elements. So when you're looking at large team diagrams and you're trying to understand who the primary stakeholder is, you're able to quickly filter those using filters and layers. All right, I just wanted to put that in the back of your mind. I spent probably too much time on that one. Layers, I'll talk about that when we get to the other section. You can select elements, you can add them to layers, move them, do other things in managing around the layers. If it gets very powerful when you're working between layers and filters, but I usually am using that in much larger, more complicated architecture views. All right, let's go ahead and close filters and layers. I don't need that. Go back to browser. And the next item is one of my favorites, pan and zoom. When I select this, it goes right here in my workspace layout. This pan and zoom could be anywhere within your layout. You just simply drag and drop and place it where you want it. And I like it right to the right of browser. So pan and zoom, I'm able to zoom in, zoom out, make things fit, zoom out, zoom in, pan around. When you get into large models and presentations, yeah, I mean, you couple filtering with pan and zoom, you're allowing yourself when you're working to focus on the elements you want to, and stakeholders who you're collaborating with drill down and filter what you want to. So pan and zoom, that's how you get to it. That's how you turn it on. Put it up there. You're going to use it a lot. So put it in your workspace. All right, next in the tools group is diagram layout. Now be careful when you're playing with this, especially in your formal diagrams. I'd play around separately to get comfortable because you can mess things up if you accidentally hit Control S and you got something crazy going on. So I'm going to go ahead and save this one. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here and I'm going to choose some interesting things. I'm going to go box style. I'm going to go, I don't know, circle. That's kind of interesting. I'm going to go eclipse. That was circle again. Eclipse. So I can keep clicking on these things per page. Never used that one before. Spring, well, it's kind of interesting. So diverge, I'm done too much. All right, so I'm going to Control Z all the way back to where I was. All right, the one I use the most, because I told you earlier, a lot of times when I'm brainstorming, I'm just dragging elements into my work area, talking about them, drawing more intelligence around associations and the elements themselves, relevance, and so on. And then I'm going, oh my goodness, I need to clean this up. So auto route is very useful. So if I have, I don't know what I want to play with here. I'm going to go with this one. I have orthogonal turned on. Let me turn orthogonal off. I'm going to go back to custom. And then I'm going to go to this break. Going to be over the one there. Take that away. So typically I have an association like that. So what I can do is, what I want to do is auto route. So I select that and it auto routed this line for me. Now it's still using custom. So it auto routed it for me in the way that I had laid out. But if I come back over here and I use line style, orthogonal square, I'm able to get orthogonal line drawing going on, right? So that's very useful, again, when you have smart guides turned on. And when you're moving things around, I'll talk about orthogonal later. But I pretty much only use auto route, open diagram layout tools. Here you go. I'll talk about this more. Again, you see a lot of the things that we just spoke about with this layout tools window, and gives you some other things that you can set and configure. Click the help button if you want to learn more. It takes you right to the Sparx site where you can read more on that. All right, next, apply default layout. When you set a default layout, you can apply that default layout. All right, so we're going to move over into the filter group now. I have filtering turned off, right? You'll notice I have fade set as when I'm filtering what I want to do, and I'll make more sense in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to keep this up so you see that, and we're going to turn filtering by relationships on. So when I select an element, you can see items are grayed out that do not have associations with them. What's interesting, as we talked about earlier, I have service exchange associated to data supply, yet you don't see the line. That's because it's hidden, if you recall earlier in the video. So it sees all the associations to the elements that are relevant to this using fade. If I turn gray, things are grayed out. If I choose hide, which is dangerous to me, things are hidden and are not relevant to the relationships when I'm filtering this particular element out of the Sparx EA SQL database. So I'm going to go back to fade, and this helps you scan and analyze your diagrams to ensure that you have all of your associations in, whether they're hidden or they're showing, that you're able to see and talk about the relevance between those. When you start using relationship filtering coupled with traceability, and we'll talk about this in a later session, you're able to have a conversation around model-driven development, model-driven architecture, right? Much more clearly using Sparx Enterprise Architect than in any other modeling tool. And I use dozens of UML tools, modeling tools, computer-aided design, CASE, computer-aided software engineering. I use a lot of tools, and I'll be sharing those in this channel, but my primary focus is on Sparx Enterprise Architect when it comes to helping us understand the unified modeling language, UML. Anyhow, let's get back to the subject. So I'll be covering the filter capabilities because there's a lot of SQL type tooling that you can do here. I'm using joins and contains and all sorts of different things to build your filters and have a conversation on your model. So I'll cover this in a later session, right? Next, we're going to get into helpers. All right, in the helpers group, it's just what it sounds like. These are helper tooling to help you do various things when you're dealing with your models. I don't use sweeper, move sets of elements vertically and horizontally based on the initial mouse, direction, position. I don't use that. If I turn it on, move something around, I'm really not seeing anything I don't normally do. But it depends on the model, type of model that you're using. This one I do use a lot. So I'm going to hit Control Z and clean things up a little bit here. All right. So you can see these two elements are a little further off to the right than I need, and I can select them and drag them, but I might get out of whack because then I got to go back and top justify, right justify, I got to do all of this stuff, especially if I'm picky about that kind of thing. Let me Control undo, go all the way back out, Control Z. All right, so if I select HV, if I mouse over it, constrains elements movement to be horizontal or vertical based on the initial mouse direction. So I'm going to select, I have HV turned on. I select these items. When I start moving them, I'm moving them horizontally. I can't mess up. I can't move them vertically as much as I would try. It's locked. So that's very useful when I want to move things over or down. See, as soon as I start going down, I can't go horizontal. I can only go vertically, right? So that's extremely useful when you're cleaning models up, you're doing your alignments, and then want to break things in. Like I could tighten up this area to make it fit in the page. So I got HV lock turned on, grab all these elements, select one, start moving horizontally. There we go. I can't move vertically, and I can tighten things up. I mean, the other way to do this is holding down Shift rather, and I can slowly move them horizontally or vertically, but that's painful. This is a very useful tool in tightening up your models, making them not eye charts in printed or web layouts, all sorts of purposes, all right? Always remember to turn these things off because you start modeling outside of this, ribbon. You're going, I got to go back. Oh, panic, right? The next one is presentation, one of my favorites. So when I have items selected, normally you can see they're just highlighted. I have these 3 items and I select this item. It's just highlighted and focused on it. When I'm on presentation, it takes away those dirty dots and lines, and it helps me when I'm talking about particular elements and items. It helps me highlight those items that I'm talking about. I can select all using the mouse. I can say, hey, I want to talk about this, this, and this. Presentation allows you to, and the help tool tells you as you mouse over it, simplified presentation mode, element selection, rectangle. So anyway, very useful. I usually leave that on. So if you see that coming up and you don't want it on and you're off on other things going, oh, how did I turn that? I need that off because that particular border color is important to a conversation and now it's confusing my audience. Remember to go to layout, go to helpers, click off presentation, and you're back to where you were. So when you're on items, you got presentation and you don't want the green border to confuse people because you have a legend that's telling them something else. Just go ahead and turn it off and things are back to normal, right? So show direction. This one's very useful. I'm going to go ahead and click it. When I select an item, and let me mouse over this so you can read the help text, do it the same. So when I highlight these things, red is outgoing and green is incoming, right? So I'm able to move. When I'm setting direction, we get into modeling, this is going to make more sense. When I'm setting direction or drawing lines, I start at an element and I end at an element, which is essentially my source to my target, right? Sometimes I get that wrong. And during my analysis, during my cleanup, I am able to see that when I show direction, right? So I'm selecting items in my audience, didn't mean to double click that. It is showing in and out, right? And again, when you mouse over it, It's going to tell you red is outgoing, green is incoming. But what if I have bidirectional? It's outgoing and incoming. It's different color, right? So just be aware of that. That's very useful when you're looking at selecting elements, talking or having a conversation. You're able to see the relevance between elements and their in and out. And that's going to become very useful when you get into advanced modeling and then model-driven development. In this particular case, you see this off color. This is, again, bidirectional. So you see an off color if I select that, right? So it has an in and an out. So these are unspecified. These have ins and outs, right? So if I select this, this, and this, you can see they both have ins and outs, right? Ins and outs. That'll make more sense when we get further along. And let's roll over to our play model. And what I want to do is turn off show direction and turn on perpendicular line. So when you mouse over it, it tells you it just forces a vertical or horizontal disposition. All right. So I'm going to draw a class 3. So I'm going to draw something over. You see that? It's forcing a horizontal line. You see that? So it's forcing that. I'm going to let go. We're going to add a class element. Again, we'll get into this more. And it just does that for you. But as far as drawing associations, you see it's forcing me to go down to vertically to where I need to go. But as soon as I let go, if you don't have, center turned on, like I talked about in the preference, it may not draw right to center. So let me do it again for you. Let me delete this one. Yes. And then let's do it again. See? Right. And then association. Let's do that. It just does, it shows you, gives you guidance, helper to drawing perpendicular lines. So that'll make more sense when you get into larger models and so on. Otherwise, without that on, let's turn that off. Let's do this. Yes, I got to turn that off. Right? Just business as usual. Willy-nilly, I can draw lines anywhere I want, any angle. But of course, it's going to land off as soon as I let go of the mouse to a particular element I'm going to, right? Next one is reorder messages. And for that, we're going to go to a sequence diagram. So do I have a sequence diagram? Yes, I do. Test. Here we go from previous session with numbers turned on. Now, as soon as I brought up a sequence diagram, this enabled, right? If I'm not in a sequence diagram, disabled. It's only applicable to sequence diagrams. If I mouse over for the helper, reorder messages on a sequence diagram, right? So typically when you're drawing message-oriented events, you're brainstorming, designing. If I try to move, let me see here. I don't have that turned on. I want to say, hey, this is not going to make sense. I want this service event call to happen above this call. I can't do it. Let me move this down more. Sequence rules. This was 1, this was 1.1. I can't do it. Now, if I don't have this tool up, if I hold the whole key down, I can reorder my sequence of events. 1, 2, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. But if I turn this on reorder message, oops, there we go. Now move this down. I don't have to hold down the Alt key. I can move message events around in the order in which they are. So very, very helpful. I just got used to, especially in other tooling, holding down the Alt key, breaking the rules, and changing reordering my message-oriented events. When we get into sequence diagrams, this will make more sense. All right, next, let's get into auto refresh and wrap up this very long video. Again, we'll have chapters down below. This is a very long video, one of the longest in the series, but I thought I needed to cover this instead of breaking it into multiple videos, putting in chapters and allowing readers, users, viewers to be able to follow in a consistent order with the momentum they want to take. So bookmark, use chapters, jump around, and make sure you're getting into the subject areas, asking the questions in the particular chapters that you have questions on, concerns, or that you're continuing your learning on. So we're going to jump over into auto refresh. We're going to talk about this more when we get into team modeling, SQL database environments, cloud environments. I'm not going to spend any more time on this one, but when you're doing team modeling, you want the ability to auto refresh, see what your team members are doing, working on similar or related diagrams, elements, models, projects, etc. So this becomes very powerful. You can disable, I have it disabled, but you can set 7 minutes, 15, 30, whatever. You can pause and edit, resume. Because when you're working with your team, when you start working on a model, it locks on their side. As soon as you move something, that model now is in change mode. And so others, they can't do modeling in that diagram until you're done. And vice versa. Modelers are working on things based on task and collaboration you're having, saying, hey, you need to work on this part. Let me know when you're done. This becomes very powerful, letting you know. So you can pause and edit. Again, we'll talk about this more in a later session. All right, so let's wrap up. All right, in this session, we talked about diagram group, appearance group. Our focus in appearance, most important, was set relationship views, select tooling group, style group, alignment group, tools group, with focus on pan and zoom is my favorite, diagram layout, filter group, where focus on relationships as a filter, helpers group, and finally the auto refresh group. In our next session, we're going to be talking about the develop tab. I hope this video on layout was helpful to you. Leave comments below, good or bad, and I look forward to reading them as we work together in progressing through understanding Sparx Enterprise Architect. Again, in the Develop tab, it's going to be very short because we're going to cover this in more advanced session, dealing with data modeling, schema modeling, and round-trip software engineering around source code. Looking forward. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.